Welcome everybody to the Friday Soul Path Community class. Today's topic is Vesta, Tending the Flame, Devotion and the Sacred Feminine. So first of all, let's talk about what Vesta is astronomically. Uh, I guess it goes without saying Vesta is an asteroid discovered as the fourth one after Ceres, Pallasthene, and Juno. And those four asteroids are the ones that were made famous first by a woman, I can't remember her name offhand, but then, of course, Demetra George wrote the book that made asteroids famous. And Vesta was discovered March 29th, 1807 by Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers. Um, and, look at this picture. I mean, this is a photograph of Vesta. And what does it look like? It just looks like a big rock. And, it's pretty much what the asteroids are. They're chunks of stuff. They orbit between Mars and Jupiter in what's called the asteroid belt or the Kuiper belt. And it takes Vesta 3.63 years to orbit the sun. Now, I also saw another statistic that said that it eight whole circles around, it comes back to the exact same place where it started. So, you think about the transit of Venus and the Venus star point system, and eight comes up in that as well. The diameter of Vesta is 326 miles or 525 kilometers. And it's considered one of the brightest asteroids and is apparently visible to the naked eye sometimes. Don't always have to have a telescope. In 2011 and 2012, the NASA Dawn mission orbited Vesta, and from that, they found that it was much more like a planet with a core, a mantle, and a crust. And you may remember that Ceres, the asteroid that is considered, I think, the largest one, was upgraded when Pluto was downgraded to being a dwarf planet. Ceres was upgraded to being a dwarf planet. And so, Vesta's like kind of, it seems like some mini planet. And the idea of Vesta and maybe even we could say the asteroids in general is that there's some level of wholeness even within this fragmentation. That there's all this, planetary stuff that's floating around in some level of predictable order between Mars and Jupiter. And, maybe with Vesta especially, we think of the need to create some kind of sacred order amid the chaos. And so I was thinking that to talk about Vesta right now, I think we're in about as much chaos in the world as we can almost handle. And maybe this is where the messages and the energy and the sacred intention of Vesta is absolutely needed for us to get through this time period. Vesta was the daughter of Saturn in Roman mythology, and interestingly, the sister to Juno, goddess of marriage and children, and Ceres, goddess of fertility and agriculture. And then we can see, Vesta as the goddess of home, hearth, and the sacred. And, they're all kind of like household goddesses. And it's interesting that the flame that the Vestal Virgins, we'll talk about them in a moment, but they were the tenders of literally the flame, in Rome that was meant to protect the empire and keep the empire safe. The flame was supposedly given to her by Prometheus. And if you remember Prometheus, he stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity so they could have fire, so they could cook food, so they could stay warm. And for that, he was punished by being, hung on the side of a mountain where an eagle came and ate his liver every day, and then magically every night the liver regrew back and then the eagle comes and eats it the next day. Just a horrifying little story, meant to keep people from messing with the special sacred powers of the gods and goddesses. Now, in Greek mythology, Vesta was Hestia. So Hestia was considered the goddess of the sacred, the household temple fire. So hearth, right? That's like hearth is like the fireplace where the fire is that is keeping the house warm and also baking the bread, cooking. So she's the goddess of the hearth, the temple fire, and the sacred flame, protector of the home, family, and community. She is meant to be virginal, celibate, with the idea that she is self-contained but not isolated. As I said, the Vestal Virgins tended to the eternal flame in Rome, and the purity of the Vestal Virgins was meant to symbolize devotion to the spiritual and to civic service. The fire was meant to represent the spiritual focus, the devotion, and community. It was all about purification, being pure and purifying through fire. And Vesta was known for the sense of boundaries, integrity, and independence. And that takes us a little bit to who were the Vestal Virgins themselves. So, first of all, they were free-born aristocratic women, but they started out as children and they were basically picked between the ages of 6 and 10 to become a Vestal Virgin. And they were meant to stay celibate and stay in service of the goddess for 30 years. And um, what do I want to say about this? I've told the story several times in the past about the Vestal Virgins of what I had first been told many years ago when I was learning the Secret Dakini Oracle tarot cards. And the person that was teaching that, who was very much part of the tantric tradition, taught that there were three stages in Rome of Vestal Virgins. There were these young girls who were chosen, and the actual card in that deck is a card that shows maybe a woman in her 20s, a younger woman, standing at kind of a tower window, just looking out. And this card of the Vestal Virgin, I used to call in my own mind all dressed up with nowhere to go. And the meaning of it was that when a girl had become a Vestal Virgin, and let's say it started when she was 10, and so when she's 40, it's over. She's considered untouchable in a way. It's like not like she could go get married after that. She would hold this special place in Roman society. I've discovered that over time. She would have special privileges. She could own property and she could vote, which women in general couldn't, but she couldn't get married and have children. Like let's say even she was, picked when she was 6, so now she's 36 and technically could have children. Nobody could touch her because she had been the Vestal Virgin. So this thing happened to you. You were selected, and as a child, it's probably considered an honor, and maybe some part of you wants to do it, but you don't realize what you're giving up at that point in time. And it was basically a lifelong commitment. And if you were a Vestal Virgin and you had sex with somebody, you were buried alive as your death penalty. The person who had sex with you was beaten to death. And, it was considered terrible because the belief was the purity of the Vestal Virgins and them keeping this fire going was meant to protect Rome and the Roman Empire and keep everybody safe from any kind of harm. And in fact, even if the Vestal Virgins let the fire go out, they were severely punished, like with a whipping. So it was it was a serious thing that happened if someone, became a Vestal Virgin and offered service. But back to my story. So, when I was learning the Tarot, the person teaching it said that there was this kind of Vestal Virgin, meant to be celibate and sacred and a young child growing into a woman, and that there were also temple prostitutes who were, getting money for the Vestal temple, the Vesta temple. And there were also aristocratic women who would go there sometimes. And there was a period of time in Roman history where women went to the temple and had sex in honor of Vesta for, for religious religious reasons. However, when I was doing my research this time and having the opportunity to, check with AI on the history of the Vestal Virgins, they could find no credible historical evidence that this had happened where the temple was a place of prostitution, or sex working, and suggested that maybe stories were conflated in that there were many goddess traditions around the world where having sex to honor the gods was something that was done. So I want to, some of you have heard me talk about Vesta before casually. I want to clarify the record that this particular version of the Vestal Virgins, being young girls who were devoted to the goddess and were celibate, is considered the historical truth. Now, of course, Christianity came along, right around the beginning of the AD time period, and Theodosius was the Roman Empire who extinguished the flame in 394 AD. So that flame was kept going for hundreds of years in the temple. And then in 1549, the temple was demolished and the marble was used to build Catholic palaces and churches, which that's sort of an interesting thing that we're moving from this worship of women and the sacred, and then the Catholic Church gets more and more power and burns out the flame and also demolishes the temple. Now, of course, we're interested in our astrological interpretations of Vesta. And here we have, first and foremost, it's about sacred dedication. It's where we focus our energy and our devotional service, the flame we tend to personally, internally, in our sense of service. We might find where Vesta is, remember, every single thing has its positive, medium, and shadow energies. On one hand, Vesta might be our divine sacrifice and show how we do it and where we do it. But it can also be that toxicity of over sacrifice, literally burning ourselves out. The sign that Vesta is in is going to indicate the style or the flavor of how we dedicate our energy or how we create sacred space. The house that our Vesta is going to show the life area where devotion, focus, or purification is going to occur for us. And remember, if Vesta's going around in 3.63 years. It's a little bit, it's about twice as fast, sorry, twice as long as Mars takes. And that makes sense because it's between Mars and Jupiter. That means that the position of Vesta is changing a lot. You're not going to have the same Vesta as people who are, even, born within months or years of you. And then we can look at the aspects of Vesta and we can see where certain planets are supporting our Vesta, or maybe there's a square to something hard, and this is where we experience a challenge to our sacred dedication to our divine. So here are key words: devotion and focus, sacred space, and it made me think of feng shui. That's not a Roman concept. Obviously, it's an Asian concept, but the idea of, creating sacred space is something that we can learn a lot from feng shui. Chastity or sexual integration, sex being sacred or special or um, spiritually energizing, perhaps. And then again, yes, the over sacrifice or burnout. It's kind of interesting. We think about the flame of Vesta, and is it a slow, steady flame that we keep moving, or do we put too much wood in and we create a bonfire and then it goes out and it's too much to maintain and then we literally are burned out. So another excellent thing to think about right now, where we're going through so much stress in the world, and channeling Vesta energy, I think can help us substantially at this time. Now, our sacred practices are going to be the usual stuff, meditation, yoga, qigong, Pilates, chanting, nature walks, soaking in water, incense and herbal sprays and essential oils, all manner of lovely, lovely, smelly things. Burning candles and fires. I think we all know the feeling of, a bonfire, in a forest, people sitting around talking, stars shining on us. I think also, sacred approach to food, sex, and the body is very much part of Vesta's area. And you may think of some other things that you do that feel like sacred practices for you. One of the sacred practices I learned in my Ayurvedic yoga practice was to get up in the morning and first thing look out the window, get the bright daylight in the eyes. That helps set the circadian rhythm for the day. Take a few deep breaths. Just kind of ground and land yourself with the sky can be just one simple piece of sacred practice. Now, when we were working on Hygeia, I used the chart of Florence Nightingale, who was a very famous nurse. She was really one of the first, if not the first, nurse that went and took care of soldiers on the field as they were struggling and dying. And her Hygeia, the asteroid of holistic healing, we saw was conjunct Venus in Cancer, the sign of healing, 10th house public, reputation, people being aware of her. This was considered, when she did it, it was outrageous because it meant that she was, touching men's bodies. It was, considered the opposite of what a nice woman would do. And it was in a square to her nodes where she's got the south node in Libra, harmony, balance, beauty, peace, and justice, Venus in Cancer ruling it, but it is a square. And I thought, well, I wonder where her Vesta would be, because there's kind of a connection in my mind. Like Hygeia is holistic healing. Think about it a lot as the healing that you do for others. Vesta is a little bit more personal and how you are cultivating the sacred for yourself. But sure enough, her Vesta is in Taurus, the sign of the body, and next to her sun and moon. She was, there in a new moon time period as she's born, where there's this big burst of energy, like I'm going to go for it. I have no clue what's going to happen or what I'm actually doing, but I know I'm going to do something. I'm going to start something. And what she started was this whole level of nursing care for people, and a different way, especially of caring for people who were in wars. So she has a pretty prominent Vesta in my mind. And then the next person I thought of as someone who, as a nun is technically meant to be chaste and celibate, And I think we all know that Mother Teresa spent her whole life on the streets of Calcutta taking care of people who were sick and very, very poor. Now, of course, since she's died, we've seen her diary and we find out that she had probably what's typical for anybody in a long-term religious life. She had her questions and doubts about what she was doing and about the church. And there's also many people who say that she could be, quite a mean and cruel person as well. So, nobody is perfect. And, she's held up as this emblem of perfection with her midheaven in Libra, supposedly, balanced and harmonious and peaceful. But it's ruled by Venus in Leo in the eighth house. And she's got some other hidden planets here in the eighth house in Virgo. So the fact that she would be particularly puritanical and maybe judgmental is not something that would surprise us. So, first, her Hygeia, holistic health, is up here in the ninth house of belief, truth, and religion. It's with her Mercury in Virgo. Virgo can also be part of holistic healing, and Hygeia in Libra, holistic healing, balance, equality, maybe for everybody. Jupiter in Libra at the midheaven, her belief system in balance and harmony and beauty for the people. I can see that with this placement. And her Vesta is down here in the sign of Taurus. So interestingly, another person who was very much of service to people who needed healing for their bodies have Vesta in Taurus, conjunct Saturn, where there's commitment and seriousness and maturity and longevity, the moon, where her heart is, and her North Node. She herself is coming from scorpionic energy in the 11th house, where she's been through death and destruction and illness and evil and the pain of living in a very public way. 11th house. Probably been trying to help people by being part of things in her past lives, as well as when someone has a South Node in Scorpio, I usually see them having lives in between the hellish lives where they go to monasteries and nunneries and ashrams and try to understand why are humans evil? Why do people suffer so much? And in this life, it was her soul's intention to come into more security, stability, body comfort. Doesn't seem to me like she did that very much. It seems like she used her North Node in Taurus and her Taurus stellium to take care of people who were living on the streets. This is fourth house, home and family. Where do people live? Fifth house, children. That was, children were a big part of what she was doing. So she definitely devoted herself to healing and helping. And we see that she has Venus, which rules her midheaven, her public image. Again, something about it is a little hidden or corrupted, but it is also in a square to Vesta, really tight. So when we talk about like the interpretation of Vesta and what's helping and what's hindering, we have, this Venus that in some way, maybe some part of her who wanted something more special for herself and wasn't totally happy with her life choice, sort of, under hidden underneath, hidden in her psychological unconscious mind here with Venus in the eighth. But we also see that we have Uranus in a trine to the stellium. It's not a tight trine to Vesta, but Vesta is going to be part of that whole grouping of planets. It's a very tight trine to the North Node in Taurus. And here, the fact that she's independent, unique, she is authentic, she is maybe awakened and enlightened to some degree. She's willing to be her own self, and she's kind of known for being a unique character. So where is Vesta in your chart? We're going to look at the house and sign position of a few charts for people who are here in person today. We'll look at transits and progressions, what's going on in the sky right now, and what that might mean in terms of a focus and energy for you right now to look at your sacred path. And we'll talk about what you see as your commitment to sacred practice. Um, without judgment, we're all in different phases of life. There's times in life where we have more time and energy for devoting to practice, and other times where we've got little spaces of time in between when we wake up and the children wake up, or once we get home from a long day's work. So I think it's really great to explore Vesta in this personal way. And thank you for being here with me today. And of course, there's lots of classes and upcoming events in the next year.